She's in 2 different pieces.
Oh, man.
Oh, boy.
So essentially what we have here is an example of how we do facial animation at the studio. It's called replacement animation. So what animators are doing when they're out on set, they're moving the body and the hair and the costume around, tiny little movements. But for facial animation, they're actually having an entire box of sometimes hundreds of different facial expressions. And those facial expressions are all predetermined. We've built exactly what the animation needs to be ahead of time. And the animators have an X sheet. And that X sheet is basically telling them at this frame of film, you need to replace one facial expression and put on a slightly different expression. And you see how the faces sort of snap into place?
Are they magnets?
They're magnets. We love magnets. We buy them by the hundreds of thousands in China. And we spend a lot of time designing and engineering this registration system. And this registration system is what allows the faces to snap back into the exact same spot. We also will be printing faces as splits, which means we have an eyebrow section and a mouth section. And then that seam line that's there is digitally erased in post-production. So it's gone in and painted out frame by frame. Now the reason why we would do that is we want to, as much as we predetermine the facial animation up front, animators when they're out on set and they're actually basically doing a live action performance just frame by frame, we want to give them the flexibility to, you know, shift things around a little bit. So by splitting things with the face, we allow them to slightly alter the timing of, let's say, an eyebrow animation depending on where the eyes are looking. Now, I remember I told you I was going to show you some disturbing things. Well, that was number 1. Number 2 is how the animators animate the eyes. They take an X-Acto blade, don't try this at home, and they actually are stabbing the eyes with an X-Acto blade.
Oh my gosh.
And they're stabbing the lid with an X-Acto blade. And they're slightly moving the eyeballs around and the lids around to get just the right eye line. And then they're replacing faces over the top. I kind of made them look a little cross-eyed there. So we've tried all sorts of things to give the animators tools instead of X-Acto blades, but they love the precision of an X-Acto blade because it allows them to sort of literally poke the eye and ever so slightly move it around. Now, this entire head, including the face, is all 3D printed. The exception of the hair. The hair is handmade. So if you guys turn around, I can show you some examples of how we do 3D printing here. See these 3 glowing rectangles of lots of different parts? This is an example of all the parts and pieces that make up a Lionel head. We are designing the Lionel puppet, at least the head of the puppet, in the computer. And we're designing and engineering all of these 3D printed parts that will be printed and assembled, and we will include some off-the-shelf hardware, nuts and bolts, and some of these are custom machined and engineered pieces. But essentially we're assembling a Lionel head, and the purpose of that Lionel head is to take and register the faces. But we're also designing and engineering what we refer to as an eye rig. And that eye rig is that little thing I was just stabbing and moving the lids around. We spend a lot of time trying to get just the right tension on the eyeball and the eyelid. We want the animators to be able to independently move an eyeball and move an eyelid without them affecting the movement of the other. And each animator has their own unique preference. Some animators want an eyeball that's tighter to move and harder to move. Other ones want it really loose. Or the same thing with lids. So we spend literally months and months and months designing these eye rigs just so we can have the control that is going to allow the puppet to give the animator the performance that they need out on set. So we've been doing this a long time. We started this process of using 3D printers back on Coraline, and we've made probably, hundreds of characters over the years. We printed literally 500,000 parts or more, but every character, every design that we do is unique. Every character, there's not much we can, because of just the subtle shape difference of their head. Some are big, some are small, some are rectangular, some are sphere. We're constantly having to find new ways to do it. Somebody asked earlier when I was eavesdropping on John's presentation, are there any advancements or improvements that you guys have made that have sped up the process? there is literally hundreds of those, but we very quickly absorb them and manage to find a new opportunity to use them, and suddenly the process becomes really complex. You know, if we were being asked to make Coraline over again, we could do Coraline in a fraction of the time that it originally took us to do Coraline. But every movie, we are finding ways to raise the bar. And that leads me right into this next thing, is 3D printing. But if you guys want to come look at how this thing is working, I'm going to explain a little bit about the technology, and I'm going to explain a little bit why this is such a complicated thing. So what you see here is some faces that are in progress of printing. On the top row is Adelina. The row below that is Link. And then we have Lionel, and then we have Stank. So how this thing is working is it's basically taking a computer model and it's slicing that model into thousands of different slices. And it's looking at each slice as just a 2D image. It is going through and it's spraying down liquid resin in very, very fine droplets, and then these bright UV lights are curing that resin. And then between every pass of this, as it's jetting it down, this tray is dropping down 16 microns, or 4 times thinner than the average human hair. So it's building up tiny, tiny, tiny layers at a time to create a three-dimensional object. So it's a lot like your inkjet printer at your house. Imagine spraying down the letter A on a piece of paper, but doing it over and over and over again in the same spot and gradually dropping that piece of paper. You're eventually going to end up with an extruded A. So it's pretty simple to imagine a simple shape like an A, how that would print, but how do you do complex things with overhangs or undercuts? And that's where this technology has a secret sauce, which is this support material. And the support material is also jetted down when it's jetting down the model material. The support material is also curing at the same time with that bright UV light, but the support material's sole purpose is to be there during the printing process and then to later be removed. So you can kind of see this weird, most of what you see here is actually white. That's the support material. So that support material, imagine printing a bowl, a 3D printed bowl. If you were to print that bowl upright, as it's printing layer by layer, you're eventually going to need to have some sort of support or scaffolding to help support the outside of the bowl. If you were to take that same model and flip it around, you're going to need support material all the way during the printing process to be there to be able to support the top of the bowl. So same thing's going on here. The printer is figuring out where it needs to put support material. I'm going to show you guys using expressions underneath. So the support material is in his nose, it's inside his mouth, it's in the magnet holes, it's in that registrations. But once you clean it away, you're left with a really complicated three-dimensional object. Where Link, that avocado with a face analogy that I was saying, is basically the fact that his facial performance is going to have to drive his fur performance. He has no neck, and his fur comes right up to his face. So we had to find a way that we could be getting really advanced facial performance through replacement animation and also animate the fur. So it took us almost a year, if not longer, to come up with a solution. And the solution we ultimately settled on was this idea of a separate 3D printed ring that we refer to as the driver. And that ring was replaced along with the face. So you can see here that this ring has magnets in it, and then the puppet has magnets in it that are cast into it. Told you we love magnets. And this ring corresponds to the shape of his face. And his shape face, that sort of figure 8 or that 8 shape, changes as he talks. It'll go from an ooh, his muzzle will get really wide, and it'll go to an ooh and get really small. So that muzzle shape is always changing. So we would have corresponding rings that would help push and pull that fur into place. So when an animator would drop it in, they'd drop the driver in, they'd get all of the fingers in place with the magnets, and then the face would animate, and then they'd stab the eyeballs with their X-Acto blade, and then the face would animate on top of it.
Oh, cute. Amazing.
And so this Link is made up of lots of different, his fur here close to his head is a silicone. This fur around here is actually a different type of rubber. that's less sticky, because we needed it to be able to actually kind of hear it. It's kind of a hard rubber because it's the furs slide over one another to allow his neck to move. We spent a lot of time with just what's the internal shape going to be. We had all sorts of different foam castings and holes to try to get the compression that we needed. So a lot of this was a challenge that we dove into based on the character design, and it was months, if not a year or more, trying to just figure out the right blend of the technique with materials and color. And we'd build a prototype, we'd get it out to animation, and we suddenly learned that, oh, that didn't work, or we found some happy accident, and then we'd dive back into the prototype phase and alter it and tweak it and send out another prototype.